If everyone could please take their seats, we're going to get started soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming back after the break. I know it's always a great time to check out, but I'm glad you're checking in. I wanted to say good afternoon. My name is Louis David. I'm the interim president and CEO at the New Orleans Business Alliance. And just to give you a little bit of background about what we do, we are the public-private partnership for economic development in Orleans Parish. So we work closely with the city, the business community, and with philanthropy. And at the end of the day, just like every other economic development organization, our goal is to grow the number of jobs and investment. So if you're working primarily in other parts of the metro area, our direct counterparts here in Jefferson Parish, JEDCO, we work with them on a lot of things, and in St. Tammany, the St. Tammany Economic Development Foundation. So it's exciting to be in front of a room with folks from all over dealing with all kinds of different real estate. And I'm excited about this panel. I've worked with all of the folks on this panel. They all have really interesting projects that I think can help us talk a little bit about some of the positive things going on in the New Orleans market and where the opportunity is. So I'll go ahead and introduce everybody really quickly. So first off, we have Curtis Doucette, Mike Merideth, Luis Banos, and Zach Kupperman, and I will let them each tell you what they do and very briefly, what project are you most excited about that you're working on right now? Curtis?
All right. Hello, everyone. Curtis Doucette. I am the CEO of Iris Development, which is a mixed-income housing development company. But the project that I'm most excited about is a project that I've taken on as a passion project, and it has taken over my life, and that's the Dewdrop Inn.
Mike Merideth with VPG. We're a vertically integrated real estate firm here in New Orleans. Project we're most excited about is what we're doing at the River District, which is mixed income, mixed use, entertainment, sports district, and excited to build a new neighborhood in New Orleans and visit Curtis's Dewdrop Inn as well too. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Louis Banos with Felicity Property Company. We do brokerage, development, asset management, and property management. I think one of the projects that we're most proud of is one that we recently finished earlier this year, the Carrollton Courthouse. It's a senior living community, and we've got a couple of others on the books and are just trying to get to a point where we can move forward with them in this environment.
I'm Zach Kupperman with Kupperman Companies. We are a real estate investment and development firm based here in New Orleans. We've got a wide array of asset classes that we focus on, everything from hotels to mobile home parks. Most excited right now, working on a project, a new renovation of a hotel in Aspen, Colorado.
Yeah. So next year, we're all meeting at Zach's new property in Aspen.
We can do that.
So a really wide variety of projects here, from smaller to really kind of game changer projects in New Orleans. And I'd like to go through and start with you all. Louis and I were just talking about what has changed in their world since opening the Carrollton courthouse. What are you guys doing in your firm? And I think that was really insightful right before we walked in here about what can you do right now with all of the challenges that we've all spent the day talking about.
Yeah, so it was less about what has changed, I think, since we opened Carrollton Courthouse this year, rather than what's changed since we began construction on it 2+ years ago. And I think that the biggest thing, it's no surprise, we've been talking about these topics all day in here, but I think it's interest rates and construction costs have gone up pretty dramatically. We were very fortunate with Carrollton, where we started that kind of right as costs, and we're able to lock in our construction costs right before they really started to go up. Today, I think it's a lot more challenging, and I'm not even sure that that would be something that would have made sense for us to move forward with. So I think that, over the last 2 years, the last year included, I think that interest rates and construction costs are probably some of the more challenging factors that have changed.
But I think you made a really good point of what y'all are doing now to be ready, because things always change again.
Right. So I guess the advice that I have, and that I think that we would encourage other developers to have, is that you've got to be really judicious in the projects that you're focusing on right now. But we also feel like it's really important to be persistent and to push along projects that may be in the early pre-development phases, to get them to a point where when market conditions do come back, and they will at some point, that you're really ready to move forward quickly and execute, and not just sit back and waste whatever period of time we're in, which, not quite as much activity. The other thing that we were talking about that we feel is important is to keep looking for deals. I mean, even though it's a challenging time, there's fewer transactions, there's still going to be great opportunities. And what we were saying earlier was that often, fortunes can be made in these downturns if you're able to get into the market and get a great property and position yourself to take advantage when the market conditions do return.
Yeah, I think it's important. Zach, tell us a little bit about, I don't know when the last time trailer parks were like on one of the front covers of the Times-Picayune. You were able to do that in a positive way. Talk to us a little bit about kind of your pivot into that world, and that's kind of an asset class that a lot of people don't immediately think of when they think of commercial real estate.
Yeah, it's different than a lot of other asset classes, and when COVID hit, I had been working on a bunch of hotels. For the most part, unfortunately, we had to immediately lay off most of the staff, and they have all recovered and are doing well, but there was an inflection point of thinking through what else and kind of what's next. And I have a partner in my mobile home park business, a guy named Alex Ramirez, who I'd worked with a long time, and really I credit him with coming up with the idea. He came to me and he's like, let's look at these mobile home parks. I said, you're crazy. What is this? What are we talking about? And the more we kind of dug into it, became a lot more appealing. And so in the last 2 years or so, we bought 10 parks throughout the Southeast, and the rest of my business is very much geared toward one-off, complicated deals that are hard to scale, historic tax credit deals or hotel deals. And the mobile home park business, I was looking for something that could scale, not necessarily beyond New Orleans, but that you could focus on a one asset class and have a dedicated team to develop some real expertise. And we put that together now, and we're building that here. We've got about 15 people, about 550 pads, hopefully be at 1,000 by the end of the year, and just totally different than hotels or multifamily or retail.
What's insurance is, I'm assuming insurance is not as big of a challenge for you than for other types, just because you're there with just the land. Is that true?
It's very challenging, as you've probably heard throughout the rest of the day. The mobile home parks are odd in a way. Some of them is literally just the land. There's nothing to insure. Some of them might have a little small office. And, and just to take a step back, we don't own any of the actual homes. Those are all owned by our tenants. So what we do own and what we do maintain are things like the roads and the infrastructure and the fencing. So there's very little to actually insure. It's very difficult to get the insurance on it. And a lot of times the lenders have a hard time thinking through, you need to get insurance. And I say there's literally nothing for us to insure. And it's very, very difficult. I think mobile home parks for a long time have been frowned upon as an asset class from institutional folks out there. And because of that, they have just, they haven't put a lot of time into it. And, there are some lenders that really like it and really put the time in to learn it and understand the insurance nuances. And there's a lot of others who don't. So it's still very challenging on the insurance front, especially in the Southeast.
With such as, and then we'll move on, but with such like a unique product, how did you find your bankers and your lenders and your insurance folks that are helping you work through like a unique thing?
It's all relationships. And I think, as I was thinking too about just New Orleans and some of the stuff we're talking about, so much of what I've found to be successful in real estate, really any business, but real estate in particular, New Orleans, is relationship building. And, everybody up here I have worked with in some capacity. And, I'm 40, and if you think about another 30 plus years of me working in the city, we'll bump into each other, we'll develop those relationships and build that trust. And so the lender front is no different. Working with lenders, repeat business, doing what you say you're going to do, and over time. Same thing with the insurance folks. I don't know if Doug Adams, if you're here somewhere in the audience, Doug does a lot of my insurance stuff with Hub. He's been super helpful, helping us find a path forward on a lot of these things.
Cool. Curtis, I drive by your development every day on my way to work. Got a chance to tour it a couple of weeks ago. Very excited about the progress that you've made. Tell everybody about the Dewdrop Inn and kind of the history if they're not familiar with it.
Yeah. So the Dewdrop Inn is a very special place in the history of New Orleans and in the history of music. It's seen folks like Ray Charles, who spent a lot of time there. Debatable, he may have lived there. Little Richard spent a lot of time at the Dewdrop Inn, and I always say that Little Richard wouldn't be the Little Richard that we know today if it weren't for his interactions at the Dewdrop Inn. But Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin and James Brown and a list, Sam Cooke, that I could just forget more people than I could remember right now who performed at the Dewdrop Inn. And then there's the greats like Alan Toussaint and Irma Thomas, who actually got her start in the music business as a professional at the Dewdrop Inn, Deacon John and James Booker and all of those folks. The Dewdrop Inn, beyond the musical history, I believe that's why people are so excited about the Dewdrop Inn, but there's a much greater history to it. There is a civil rights component to the Dewdrop Inn that a lot of people are not familiar with. Pre-integration, folks would get arrested for race mixing at the Dewdrop Inn. And the owner, Frank Panier, hired his attorneys at the time were A.P. Turo and Dutch Morial to fight against the city of New Orleans on behalf of bar owners. And if you're from here, you know the history of those two people and how big a deal they were in the landscape of our city. And there's also some LGBTQ history there. There was a performer there named Patsy Vidalia, who was what they called then a cross-dresser, a female impersonator. And Patsy was larger than life and well-loved. So here in the 1950s, the Dewdrop Inn had a huge annual gay ball at Halloween time. So the Dewdrop Inn was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. It was listed in the Green Book as a safe haven where black people could do all the things that, like eat at a restaurant or stay at a hotel, drink at a bar, enjoy music, or enjoy a barbershop, get a haircut. And that's all the things that the Dewdrop Inn was historically.
And so y'all are on LaSalle, kind of in the Central City area. Tell us about what people will see when you open in the next couple months.
Yeah, so we're at 2836 LaSalle Street, on LaSalle between Washington and Louisiana, or more specifically, Washington and 6th. So I think the first thing that you'll see is a building that's been restored to what it used to look like back in 1953. The building is now on the historic, on the National Register because of our work, and that is a big part of the financing, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point, but that made the project able to receive like $2.5 million and counting because we keep overspending in tax credits. But the building will look like it did in 1953. We'll also show you the evolution of the building. So there's something for everybody. Like if you love historic buildings, there's something for you there because there's a story of how these buildings were cobbled together over the course of from 1900 really up until the late 1960s. Starting off as 2 single homes and ultimately evolving into what it is today. So there'll be that element. It will be a music venue again. And it will also be a hotel as it was before. One of the things that I'm really proud about is in the hotel, some of this history, I've somewhat become like a bit of a historian working on this project. And a lot of that history we will highlight at the Dewdrop Inn. So if you go to a room, each of those rooms will celebrate someone special who had significant time or has been impacted or been impactful to the Dewdrop Inn. So a lot of those names that I mentioned, Little Richard, Ray Charles, but of course people like A.P. Turo, Dutch Morial, and Patsy Vidalia, folks like that will be honored with a room. But we've also added another element, something I stole from Zach. We'll have the pool in the back where people can come on a daily pass. And so that's what you have to look forward to. From a music programming standpoint, I really can't talk much about it yet because it's undefined. But while we celebrate what the Dewdrop Inn was, there's some really big shoes to fill, and I hope that we can fill them. And the question that I ask all the time of the folks who will be doing the music programming, and I'm thinking through this myself, is if the Dewdrop Inn was uninterrupted, if it never died or went to sleep, what would it be today? And so as much as we would like to celebrate the history and have some of those old performers who were there, like Deacon John and Irma Thomas, who are still alive and performing, we'd also like to be a place that people talk about in another 50 years. As we talk about the historic jam sessions that used to happen at the Dewdrop Inn, the musicians would go to the Dewdrop Inn, participate in the jam session, go to sleep and wake up and continue to participate in the jam session that was still going on. New genres of music were created at the Dewdrop Inn. And so, pardon me for being long-winded about this, but there's a lot that we're going to be doing at the new Dewdrop Inn.
Yeah, it's awesome. You're kind of doing something that Zach and his partners did a couple of years ago, going in, putting a different type of product in a neighborhood that has none of that. A really sophisticated dining bar concept with hotel. How do you get people on board when they're like, what are your comps? Who else is building in your neighborhood? And you're like, well, it's going to be me first.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good question. And I don't know that I so much had that problem, because I remember early on when I was being interviewed, like probably the first attempt at an interview, someone called me and said, you want to talk about this? I was like, no, because we're not at a point where I know this is going to happen for real, and I don't want to fail publicly, right? But when I finally talked to that reporter, she said, well, there was a developer here who said he didn't want to do this because who's going to come to LaSalle Street to go to a hotel? And I said, well, I'm crazy enough to believe that people will come not only to LaSalle Street, but they'll come from all over the world to come and see the Dewdrop Inn. So that belief that I had about what the Dewdrop Inn is and was, I wasn't by myself, so it wasn't a hard sell. And there are comps. You were a comp. The Drifter was a comp, right? There are projects before that have done it. When you started the Drifter, Tulane wasn't, I'm sure a lot of people looked at you like you were crazy. In fact, I think I had an easier go of it than you did. Yeah,
I think
that
it's really
was successful.
I think it's really cool because a trend in tourism and just like how we live our lives is to visit these unique, one-of-a-kind places in very authentic neighborhoods. And if you look at what we've added in New Orleans between the Drifter, the Peter and Paul, St. Vincent, the Columns, Chloe, we've got now this like, whole set of really, you could be in New Orleans for 6 weeks and have totally different experiences each weekend at each of those properties. But I just wanted to let you say quickly, talk about your time frame, when you first had the idea to where we are today.
I'm really terrible about time, to be honest with you. I don't know when I started. I don't know if I had a life before this. So I think that officially I started looking at it, well, I do have this frame of reference. It was right around the beginning of the pandemic that I first became interested in it. I think that I closed on the deal probably in June of 2020. Well, in some ways I closed, but I didn't officially really close on it until March of 2022. So all of that was pre-development, somewhere about a year and a half, a year and a quarter of pre-development. We've been doing construction now for about a year and a half and counting. We'll open, that date keeps moving, you all, but I can say 2023.
I like it.
I feel like whatever date I say just moves forward, so
Yeah.
it just continues to push forward. But we're expecting probably November, December-ish at this moment.
And especially in the theme of today, when we've talked a lot about challenges and headwinds, this project itself has been through lots of challenges before you got there. Like, you're not the first to attempt to do this.
No, I mean, a lot of people have tried. I mean, first of all, the family. And by the way, I'm really proud to say this. I bought the building from the grandson of Frank Panier, who was the original business owner, right? And then I said, Mr. Jackson, I think you should still be involved in this project. Would you like to take some of your money and reinvest? And he did. So Frank Panier's family is still an owner in the project, right? So, so I'm excited about that. But yes, a lot of other people have tried, and I don't know a lot about the circumstances prior to those folks giving it a go. But I do think that I happen to be uniquely qualified as really what I have been for my whole career as an affordable housing developer. And as Michael can tell you, that's some of the hardest development to do, particularly to make a deal pencil. And that was always the challenge with this project. And so I just felt like I happened to be the right person with the right skill set at the right time.
It's a good point that sometimes we think of a project or a site or a business as snake-bitten, and that's not always the case. It just takes the right circumstances to come together.
A little bit of luck.
Yeah, and a little bit of luck. All right, so I think Mike has one of the toughest jobs in the city. Mike is working with the team to redevelop, like 7 full acres? Or 7 blocks, city blocks.
7 blocks, yes.
7 city blocks in downtown New Orleans. A similar project that there have been lots of things proposed for that site. Tell us a little bit about the overall vision of River District and where we are now, and which, congratulations, you guys just signed a major office tenant with Shell, which is also, yeah, and that is really helpful in my world, that I can point to, hey, Shell is making a long-term commitment to being in the city with a really best-in-class office product. So I'll talk a little bit about where we are and how we got there.
Yeah, so a little bit of background. I'm one of 7 developers on the team, and I think how the project came together is awesome and can be a shining star for how projects get done across the nation. So Louis Lorcella got the call, and he calls himself the underdog, right? We were the underdog team, but his vision was to create a team that looked like New Orleans, but also the best and the brightest. And that came with 7 of us from different backgrounds, myself from affordable workforce housing and construction, and folks in office, retail. So you can imagine 7 developers who've never worked together getting in one room and creating this idea for what we saw as a new neighborhood. And that literally was in a conference room with transparent paper over the site plan and trying to figure out how we do that. But from the beginning, our commitment was to create a new neighborhood that was open for all, that looked like New Orleans, and that allowed folks who worked and lived in the area to still stay there. So that meant a commitment to affordable housing. We are committed to over 450 units of affordable and workforce housing there on site. And that meant a commitment to diversity and equity across all gambits. So that's, construction, architecture, retail. All of those things were things that at the beginning, having a diverse team that we prioritize. And so you think about folks like Ilse Engineering. She's a wonderful, capable minority engineer, and she has run lead on one of the most complex, civil projects in our city, right? And so it's shown that there's capacity, there's capability, and along the way, that diversity of minds has helped us to have some big wins, right? So, we are excited last week to announce that we're out of due diligence, meaning that that's good news and bad news, right? Our as a developer, our deposit and our money is hard, right? So we're in the deal. But it releases us to go and start doing infrastructure work. So before the end of the year, you'll see dirt moving, there on site. Topgolf was a big win for us,
Yeah.
right? And, full disclosure is these deals are tough to get done, right? You see the announcement and ribbon cuttings, but behind the scenes, like, folks are, ripping off ties and throwing paper across the wall, like, trying to get a deal done. And so when you have wins like Topgolf, and we talked about Shell, being the first new office built in New Orleans in the last 40 years, those things create momentum. And that's what we're excited about, is the momentum that we're seeing here. With the Shell announcement, we've got national folks from all across the nation who want to think about relocating their office to New Orleans, or current folks in New Orleans who want to expand and be in a district. And one thing that I always take pride in is, where else in our region can we think about folks who have been disenfranchised, who haven't had access to quality, affordable housing, get a chance to live in a district with transportation, healthy foods, next to a Topgolf, right? And that is something that New Orleans will be able to shine and show the nation for years to come.
And next to, downtown New Orleans is the largest job center in the state, near transit, near all of the things that we don't have to recreate as if this were a new, totally new development.
Yeah, and I think this is phase one, right? I think this is, we were strategic in our team acquiring the Market Street Power Plant. So that is under our control, and things that we're programming, to, what we think is going to be immersive entertainment and shopping and retail, and further office, further housing, further entertainment. Those are things that, we feel, it is going to create a new neighborhood. And, to your point, I think it's quality of life, right? And those are all the things that we're intrinsically thinking about on a daily basis, is how do we provide a neighborhood and a product where folks can love New Orleans, live New Orleans, and also visit too, right? Because this is a tourist hub right next to the convention center, and how do we uplift their mission, as well too?
What are national prospective tenants? What's their take on New Orleans right now? Sometimes, a lot of times, we can get caught up in our own worlds and not realize that some of the challenges that we face are the same challenges people face in lots of other cities. But what kind of reaction when you're shopping the project to people when you say New Orleans? What's their initial feedback?
Well, I think most people have got a chance to visit New Orleans, and they see it as this fun place, right? So that hits them immediately. Oh, I love New Orleans. And then they start to think about economic demographics, right? And so we are limited on job growth and those perspectives. Specifically to, the River District, we've had to kind of ride by some homeless encampments to get to that space. But I think what, those are, I guess, some of the challenges, but what national folks and institutional investors like is scale, right? And so when you have the ability to impact a neighborhood on a $1 billion basis, you can move the needle yourself, right? And so any of the economic headwinds or any of those headwinds that we see, we're able to move the needle because we are making such a big splash in that district.
What can we expect to see over the next 12 months at the site?
So, 12 months, you will see dirt moving. You'll see, infrastructure work starting before the end of the year. Topgolf will hopefully break ground before the end of the year. That goal is to be open by the Super Bowl in 2025. I think you'll start to see the office building go vertical in, Q3 of next year. So it will be very busy. I mean, you can always, large part of what we had to make sure we took into account was traffic. If you come down Chompatulis, you can understand right now that it's a mess with all the trucks. And so, we were very intentional about making sure we spent those infrastructure dollars in the traffic mitigation and how we reroute folks to make this a neighborhood that's comfortable. Because the last thing we want to do is create a district that is uncomfortable and not traffic, thoughtful about how we do that. So over the next 12 months, you'll see, I don't think you'll see too many cranes yet, but you'll definitely see tractors on the ground. You'll see dirt moving and forward momentum for sure.
And when, I know our colleagues at Entergy New Orleans and the city are working with your team a lot on the infrastructure stuff, you got to realize there's really not much infrastructure there. I mean, it's been parking lots for, 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I think that was a large part of, why the deal was attractive to a lot of folks is the convention center had contributed, $26 million in infrastructure dollars to help to do that, along with the city, putting funds in as well too. So that's a large part, I think, that I've seen and grown along as a developer is how to sweeten your deal, right? And through public-private partnerships, getting folks on board, having a big project, we've been able to create something, I think, that's enhanced because of those additional dollars that have come in from our public partners at the convention center in the city.
And Louis, y'all have one of the other newest office projects in the city, the project on Magazine Street, just a couple blocks down. As Mike said, we haven't had a whole lot of new office product in this market, but I feel like since COVID, we've seen a lot of these niche, smaller neighborhood office developments across the city. What's been y'all's experience with your development?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's an exciting project. I think it's similar to some of the other things we've done, being an urban infill project. If you mention to people in general that you're doing or you're planning on doing a spec office project, you get some interesting responses because it's you read the national headlines and people tend to take a broad stroke approach to it and say that is the absolute worst asset class you could ever invest in. But like most things, we find that it's more nuanced. Most of the offices that have been built in New Orleans were built in, we had a slide up earlier today, but I forget what it was. It was in either the 70s or the 80s. I know that those were two big decades. And the reality is that we've got really dated office product for what top talent and the younger generation is looking for today. And so how the space has evolved is that they want places that are in urban areas that are walkable, that have different asset classes like retail, great restaurants, that there's a very big focus on design, indoor-outdoor spaces, and places where you can collaborate as teams, not just the old kind of cubicle farm that they mentioned earlier. And when you look at those sorts of spaces, there's not a whole lot of product in New Orleans that offers that. And so for companies and for the city, we felt like, hey, this is something that's really critical to be competitive with other cities like Nashville and like Austin or Dallas or whatever it is, where they do have these great products where younger people that are coming out of school want to be. They want to live in that neighborhood. They want to work there. And so we have seen a lot of demand for it. We were looking at doing retail on the bottom, basically like a co-working and flexible office product on the second floor, and then sort of more traditional short-term and longer-term leases with some larger companies on the top floor. The response has been fantastic. I think that there's a lot of great companies that are excited about it. Where we are with that project is the same challenge that I think a lot of developers face, where we had finished plans early in the COVID unfolding over 2 to 3 years ago, and our construction numbers jumped probably 25 to 30% over that year, and so it's causing us to reevaluate and to make sure that this is something that continues to make sense. but we haven't lost conviction in that product type in mixed-use projects. And I mean, this is literally around the corner from what they're doing. And so, you know, we are very excited about what they're doing as well.
Yeah, I think Shell's commitment really speaks to once there is a modern office product on the market, there are people who are going to be interested in it. And just to write off and say that's never going to happen in New Orleans because we don't have it, it's kind of chicken and the egg.
Right. Yeah, I just want to add to your point, the marketability of new space is all of those things, but it's also the ESG component that comes along with that. You know, Shell is building a LEED Platinum development there. That's like the, you know, all the bells and whistles of, you know, environmental awareness, and that is the trend of, you know, all of our big national companies, right? They're incentivized at the federal level to do that. So that's going to be, I think, something that's changing in our environment. Is folks are going to be looking, how do I you know, LEED may not have been as popular, but it's super popular, you know, and I think necessary on a lot of economic models for these bigger national companies.
That's a good point. Zach, I think your hotel to apartment project on the North Shore was really interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what kind of forces may be around now that weren't 5 or 6 years ago before that project?
Yeah, so we, about a year and a half ago, bought a Hilton Homewood Suites in Covington that had been struggling since COVID, and you know, not as strong of a hospitality market on the North Shore as down here. And so we, and at the same time, saw there was a bigger demand for housing and really nothing on the drawing board in terms of new apartment buildings in Covington. And so the idea was to terminate Hilton, which we did, and convert the hotel into multifamily apartments. So you know, that deal worked well because it was an all-suite product. So there were kitchens and bathrooms and, you know, not what you think of normal hotel rooms. And we were able to go in and change it up, and we finished construction in this past April, and we're almost 90% leased in 4 or 5 months. So there was a big risk. You know, the Covington market has almost no studios. We've got about 50% studios, so that was one area where there were not a lot of comps, and, you know, somewhat of a challenge to get the lender on board to work with us there, but it's worked out really well. And you know, we've got 1s and 2s and 3s, and those all leased up immediately. And studios are coming along. We're you know, probably 40% leased probably 80% of those are done now. So that was good, and, you know, that was my first project in St. Tammany Parish. Totally different experience than New Orleans. Some good, some bad, but, you know, it was interesting going into another market and seeing how that's sort of worked out.
What's been the reaction to that type of product? The North Shore, as we all know, doesn't have as many multifamily options as other parts, just because it's the population there is newer, but also more, you think of it as more of a family single home market. But what's been the response to, you know, a newer type of product with a lot of amenities and location and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's been well received for that particular deal. We did not need to go through any special entitlement or zoning change. We could execute the plan as of right without doing anything. So there wasn't really a neighborhood component to go through, and that was you know, nice to have, because that's, you know, almost impossible to get done. And it's been really well received. I mean, like I said, we're almost 90%. It's been great. There's other apartment product in the market, but nothing's been built in maybe 3 or 4 years, and really nothing on the drawing board. If you know, I've seen some other projects that are getting killed out there in lawsuits, and you know, it's just really hard to do a lot of these projects. And so in a lot of ways, we were lucky, just kind of threading the needle on the building, the timing, the zoning, and some good partners involved.
Cool. So I want to go through and ask you all, how did you get your most recent project financed, and what was unexpected about that process? Zach, I'll start with you and come back here.
It's a weird lending environment right now. The last 3 of the mobile home park deals we have bought have all been seller financed. There were 3 deals that I had under contract October of 2022, and we were working with a national group that syndicated deals for small credit unions around the country. The deal had been approved. It had been pre-approved. We had a commitment letter. The lenders had signed up for it. Loan documents were negotiated. Everything was literally ready to close. And when that October interest rate change happened, they sent our deal out with 10 other loans, none of which were mobile home parks. And there are 320 credit unions, and they all came back with 0. We're not doing any of the deals. And so that was a terrible experience. The first time I had that happen, I had to drop two of the deals. Lost money on both of them, all the diligence costs and everything. The third one, we were able to negotiate with the seller to do seller financing, and the 2 subsequent ones have been seller financed. So that's worked really, really well. That's hard to do, and in a lot of ways, we also got lucky.
So for ours, the most recent one, again, is the courthouse that was finished earlier this year, which means that the financing was really lined up probably 2 years in advance. For this one, it was a different product type that we don't normally specialize in. We've done a lot of historic renovations. We've done a lot of multifamily, but we had never done a senior project. And so we looked to partner with who we thought were some of the better operators in that space to manage a senior living facility. So they partnered with us as on kind of the GP side of the deal. We really had the task of developing it, and then the idea was to hand it off to them to manage from an operational standpoint. That's worked well. The other component to the equity was a large national private equity group based out of South Florida. They specialize in senior living, and these were the sorts of things that they look at putting dollars towards. In this case, it was for us, it was a larger dollar amount. I mean, this is approaching a $50 million project, which for New Orleans is pretty substantial. So it's helpful to have a national partner that was willing to come into this market. That's not an easy task. And then the other group that was the operational partner was based out of North Carolina, but had a really good, and they still have a great footprint in the Southeast. And for the lender, we used a large regional bank that both the private equity provider and then the other general partner had a really good relationship with, based out of North Carolina. I will say that I don't know if we went to the market later than we did, or if we were going today, if you'd be able to get those same rates, or that we'd even be able to get it done. So we were very fortunate in our timing with that.
Mike, you're in the middle of it.
I guess I'm next. So the last deal we closed was an interesting deal. It was we bought an apartment, an affordable housing deal that was coming out of compliance. So it was coming up to compliance, and we were engaged very early on in the process. The owner had some IDA repairs that were taking long, and so our ability to have a construction company in-house made us very marketable, because they had to have the units back online by the end of the year to avoid penalties by the IRS. And so we negotiated the purchase agreement in April. We brought our construction company in. And there's just a lot of different nuances, getting approved by the Louisiana Housing Corporation, being able to bond around the exposure for tax credit investors. But we financed that because it was a good deal on the basis with Home Bank here locally, and their expertise in understanding, the nuances was important there, but also their patience, right, is to be able to hold rates, at a certain amount of time, given, where things were headed, were extremely helpful in us to be able to close a deal. That was on the debt side. On the equity side, we were very intentional about syndicating equity from diverse partners. So we had a goal of at least 50% of the equity partners were from a diverse background. I think we were able to hit 65% capital raise on the equity in that deal, and making sure that we were creating wealth in our diverse network, and giving folks opportunities to invest in multifamily that may not have had that in the past. So,
Curtis?
Yeah. as I listened to you, I'm thinking it would be nice to be able to just say, debt and equity. Next question. I guess the most recent project that's broken ground is the Dewdrop Inn. And that project had a mix of a lot. It was historic tax credits, both state and federal. It was new market tax credits, both state. It ended up being federal also because we had so many gaps for all of the problems that we talk about in the development process that hit us midway: insurance, increased construction costs, things that you guys talked about. We also had CDBG dollars, quite a bit of money from the state at 1%. We got some of the same type of money from NORA at 2.5%. And then, of course, there's bridge loans and all of that kind of stuff to get us through. And then the final bit of it was friends and family equity. And I spent my jacket money on it.
We got 6 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions before I ask a final question of the panel? Anybody?
Oh, are you thinking about the office product that we talked about earlier? So it's actually right across the street from an existing project that we have called Framework. So I think the address of the new one is 1335. It's currently just a vacant parking lot, and there's a small structure that's still left there, but it's several blocks from the interstate on Magazine.
Saw a question up here. No? That's it? Gosh. Y'all just taught everybody everything. Okay, so
They're exhausted.
yeah. So my last question for each of you, where would you invest if you were looking to invest in New Orleans? Where do you see opportunity in the real estate market, like in the next year to 2 years? Curtis?
I don't want to be first on
Next
that
door to the Dewdrop?
one. He said, skip. Well, that's true. Yes, that. But and that's because I mean technically I have bought the building next door to the Dewdrop Inn, and so and so I guess where I would invest, as I was all prepared to say, the way I really look at this right now is I haven't really looked at new projects. Our team has been looking at something that we've been successful with, which is garden-style apartment complexes. It's just something that we've been doing for years, and we've gotten good at it. So we're looking for that, but there's lots of challenges associated with that. The interest rates are killing us. The insurance rates are killing us. And construction, I'm not as concerned, but it's a lot higher these days. So, my focus has really been on doing what I'm doing right now and trying to do that well. But the things that will help me to make a neighborhood on LaSalle Street are my focus in the near future.
I think for me, aside from, the River District, which is a full-time job in itself, is, understanding and looking for what we see are going to be distressed assets, right? Like, there are going to be folks who survive this, and unfortunately, there are going to be folks who don't, right? And there's a change in the market correction at whatever destabilize insurance and interest rates and all those things, come along. And so I think our focus in making sure we're being patient, one, but two is making sure that, I think Lewis talked about it earlier, was establishing relationships with making sure we're still going after deals, because somebody may say no for the next 6 months. They get their insurance renewal, and now it's a absolute yes, right? And so, we are being patient, but that's how we grew our company, was buying distressed assets and being able to create value in those at whatever we saw the future market values are. So I don't think it's anything geographical, but we're looking for, specific value play opportunities where we can come in and buy at, current market conditions, assuming that market conditions are going to get better down the road.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there's going to be opportunities where properties are going to be distressed, and and the only thing that I would add is I think a focus on a couple of different things, but essentially it's quality. So number one, it can be a distressed asset, but you would hope that it's got to be in a really good location. That, to me, it would be an incredibly, great opportunity to uncover. And then you've got to make sure, even if it is distressed, that, from a financial underwriting standpoint, it's still really competitive, because that's what it's going to take in order to get the different things that you need in order to execute on a deal done in this sort of environment. So I think it is potentially distressed deals. I really like the idea of mixed use and what these guys are doing in the River District. I think that's going to play out, in the long term very, very well for the city. So yeah, I think it's a similar thought. Focus on quality, focus on location, and make sure that the finances work.
New Orleans, unfortunately, doesn't have a ton of growth in any particular asset class. And so, our approach is less about a blanket thesis where we're trying to deploy a certain amount of capital in a certain neighborhood in New Orleans. And it's very much you're hustling for deals, you're trying to find the right things. Maybe some come up that are distressed. We will, maybe not, but we will look at, we're looking at hotel opportunities. We're looking at multifamily, retail, and it's all about the mechanics and the fundamentals about that particular deal, regardless of where it is and what the size is. So I think, to survive and to thrive and to grow in a market like New Orleans in development, it's very challenging for a lot of reasons, a lot of which you've heard today. But, the deal flow, you need to be very opportunistic and really hustle to find the right deal. And I think, for all of the challenges as a city that we face, of which there are, of course, many, I think one of the things that you can do, there's two sides to this coin, but relative to a city like New York, we don't work as hard and as long as people live in New York. That's a very broad blanket statement. But the other side of it is you can get ahead just by busting your butt and working really, really hard of 90% of your peers in whatever industry you are. So I think there will be a lot of opportunity coming up in the next few years, and I think to avail yourself of that opportunity is just by really working nonstop and finding the right deals.
Well, guys, thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you all do to bring these really awesome projects to life in New Orleans. And thank you to everybody in the audience. Everybody, we're all on the same team selling New Orleans in lots of different aspects. So I appreciate that. And thank you to Mignon and her team for putting this all together. So a round of applause for the panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is David Keller, and I am a co-chairman for the Forecast Committee of CID NOMAR. First off, I want to thank the committee chair, Mignon Richard Diaz, for all of her hard work in shaping this event. Her continued efforts have been instrumental in making today a success. I also want to thank my co-chair, Lance Ginn, for his dedication to this committee and this organization. It has been an honor to serve alongside the two of you, and I am thankful for the friendship that we've created along the way. I want to thank the Forecast Committee. Your time as a volunteer is not overlooked. It is a sacrifice made to the betterment of this organization and this community. I want to thank the NOMAR staff for all of their help this year. This event has grown in ways previously thought unimaginable, and that would not have been possible without your time and dedication. The theme of the event this year is adapting to unpredictability, which is an oxymoron or a very difficult task at the least. It's challenging to prepare for the unexpected. No one has a crystal ball, but we've got to take our best guess as to what's coming to give ourselves the best chance at weathering the storm or basking in the sunshine. When the committee was discussing this theme and preparing guidance for our speakers, we put an emphasis on just that point. The title of this event is Forecast. We want to educate our attendees as best we can about issues that we as a city and a region are likely going to face or continue to face in the future. At first glance, our conference is about local real estate, where real estate agents and appraisers get continuing education credit for attending. Why are we covering all of this? To an outsider, it would seem like some of our topics fall outside of the realm of what real estate practitioners should concern themselves with. To that, I would say that we live in a wildly dynamic and unique part of the world. In turn, the variety of challenges we face are unlike anywhere else in the country or in the world. Living in this city means accepting that there will be challenges. I think one of the most beautiful things about New Orleans is that those who choose to call it home are keenly aware of these challenges, yet they choose to be here anyway. It is a choice to live here, not always an easy one. It is a choice to conduct business here. It is a choice to build a family here. As real estate practitioners, we are in the business of place. What can't be replicated elsewhere in the world, for those who choose to call this city home, is the sense of place. As such, we must do whatever is necessary to ensure that this is a viable place for generations to come. I believe that anytime we've got national experts and leaders of their respective industries engaged in dialogue, especially in front of an audience, we all stand to benefit. Folks, mark your calendars. We've got the date for next year secured. We'll be back here in JPAC on October 3rd, 2024. A general housekeeping note, if you would, please make sure to fill out the CE card in your booklet and give it back to us prior to exiting the building. And there is a survey on the back, and we would appreciate your feedback. And don't forget, we've got hors d'oeuvres and cocktails in the lobby after this, thanks to Crescent Title. Folks, we're about to hear from our last speaker of the day. We've had the privilege of hosting the speaker many times throughout the event's history, and his perspective and insight is always thought-provoking and relevant. Before that, we have a brief commercial from our title sponsor, Gulf Coast Bank.
You have a vision, but building it takes planning, focus, energy, and the right people helping you along the way. Get to know Gulf Coast Bank and Trust lending team, and together, let's make that vision a reality. After all, we're the local bank that cares about you. Whether commercial or residential, from construction to completion, let's make it happen.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce Guy Williams, President and CEO of Gulf Coast Bank and Trust.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for hanging in. Boy, this has been a long, tough day. Your reward for hanging in is that you're going to hear about a very serious national problem, but it is a very solvable national problem. So, once again, thank you for hanging in. I appreciate the job y'all do every day, and wish we didn't have to start with a problem, but once again, it is a solvable problem. And maybe after hearing about all the local problems of subsidence and insurance, it's sort of nice to to know that other people are sharing in this. So, we all probably remember Apollo 13 made into a great movie, that famous line, "Houston, we have a problem." When NASA analyzed the problem, they realized that it actually started about 3 years earlier. And they dug into it and they discovered there'd been a lot of different issues that led up to an almost catastrophic result and a loss of a spaceship returning to Earth. What I'm going to talk about today is something that has been brewing for a while and is a genuine, serious problem that needs to be addressed. And if you'll hang in with me, you will understand this in a way that most of the folks that work for us in Washington don't, and almost none of the talking heads on TV do. So hang in, it's a tough problem. It is solvable. But here's what we're looking at. We had a financial crisis. We remember that all too well, and what we're looking at is a comparison of government outlays compared to government revenues. And you see that after the financial crisis in 2008, the outlay line began to come back down to the revenue line. Things were going to be okay, and that difference, that gap, is called the deficit. Well, we all know what a deficit is. When you spend more than you take in, that's a deficit. Many of us have had times in our lives where, you look at the year and you actually spent more than you take in. And I know some of my friends in real estate are saying, yeah, I know exactly what that's like. That's this year, spending more than I took in. Well, you can do that for a while, but you can't do it for a long time because eventually the interest accrues and at some point people quit lending to you. Well, what happened, you see that big spike. That was COVID, tremendous increase in outlays. And of course, that was a serious response to a global problem. But the challenge that we face as a nation is after COVID, the policies that were adopted permanently reset the spending baseline. So the spending baseline you see is going up in all the out years. And this isn't imaginary. This is a combination of information from the Congressional Budget Office, which represents our Congress, Office of Management and Budget, which represents the White House. So we see a reset where outlays now substantially exceed revenues for the foreseeable future. Now, the challenge with that is as those budget deficits increase, look at what's happening to interest. Net interest becomes a big driver of the deficit, and it gets worse. It compounds upon itself. Albert Einstein once was asked, what's the most powerful force in the universe? And he said, compound interest. Well, I think he's right. And you look at the interest, you look at what it's doing to the deficit, this is an underlying cause of the problem that we're having in our real estate business. Because the Treasury and the Federal Reserve control short-term rates. The market controls long-term rates. And long-term rates are driven by expectations of budget deficits, expenditures, and economic outlooks. There's a lot of pessimism about long-term rates, and therefore, the rates that we're having to deal with that are challenging our business are higher than they should be. So what makes this deficit occur? If you look at the spending, we've got a lot of money that goes into healthcare. That's by far the biggest area. But over time, you see interest overwhelming everything else. We have Social Security, and you see a flat line there. That doesn't even address the fact that in 8 years, Social Security runs out of money. If nothing happens to Social Security, benefits will be cut by 30%. So whatever dollar amount you're getting, if you're getting $1,000, suddenly that turns into $700. Unfortunately, our politicians are not taking this seriously. The two leading candidates for president, you can pick the one you like or you can say none of the above, have both said we're not going to touch Social Security. What that means is in 8 years, benefits will be cut 30% if you don't touch Social Security. A lot easier to start planning now, but that's not occurring. So if you look at this and you see what's happening, expenditures are going up rapidly, healthcare is a big problem, and we really are facing a challenge of how do we deal with this compounded deficit? So you've got our couple arguing, we can't cut healthcare, we certainly need education. Well, what about the defense? We'll cut the Defense Department. If we eliminated the Army, you still have a deficit. And if we eliminated the Army, what sort of world would we face? Let's just imagine you just fire all the soldiers, no Army, no Air Force, done. Cut defense is always a good idea. Do you think this is a sort of stable world where we could get away with that? So you think, well, what can we do? We can't cut, we don't want to cut healthcare, we don't want to cut education, we can't get rid of the Army. It turns out there are bad actors out there who are willing to invade sovereign countries. So what in the world do you do? The political answer is, well, let's tax people that are not us. We'll get Bill Gates to pay for it. And this is a great solution, a wonderful idea, except it won't work. Now, if you can understand this slide, I'm going to spend a few minutes on it, you're going to be ahead of 90% of the people in Washington, D.C. This is not a made-up slide. This comes from the Federal Reserve, Bank of St. Louis. And what it shows you is U.S. government expenditures, and U.S. government receipts, rather, as a percent of gross domestic product. You know, we had our economist earlier. For those of you who are not economists, gross domestic product is just the sum of everything we make in the U.S. It's the total production for the year. Well, how much of that goes to the federal government? This goes all the way back to World War II. And you notice the receipts to the federal government never go above 20%. Now let that sink in for a minute. The receipts, the amount of money the federal government gets from all of us, from every business, from every estate, from every tax of every sort, has never gone above 20%, not even during World War II. And if you go back through these years, there have been times when the highest marginal tax rate was 90%. There have been times when it was 70. You had the Reagan tax cuts, you had the Trump tax cuts, you had the Clinton tax increases, you had the Obama tax increases. Regardless of rates, revenue to the government never went above 20%. So if you think about it, this is the challenge that our couple is wrestling with. It's like, what do? We can't cut spending. We can't cut health care. We certainly can't get rid of the Army. That would be disastrous. We want to pay Social Security. And if you look back to this first slide, you notice this revenue line. This was produced by the Office of Management and Budget. And you notice how flat it is. It's a percent of GDP. It doesn't go above 20% in any of the out years. So our federal government, who is spending the money, recognizes this reality. Revenue from all of us is not going to go above 20%. So what do? We've got a real challenge. We have a trend line that can't be sustained. And there's an economic saying which is unsustainable trends are. And it stops. And what that means is they're unsustainable. You just can't keep doing it forever. Something will occur to stop this unsustainable trend. We're not going to be able to collect more than 20% of revenue. Now, if the economist was still here, she would raise her hand and say, wait, Mr. Williams, there is one way to collect more, and that's a national sales tax. If you have a national sales tax with no exemptions, you can push the collections up. Unlikely to pass, unlikely to be popular, because everybody's proposal, if they're an elected official, is let's tax somebody that's not my constituents. So absent a national sales tax, we're not going to collect more than 20% of revenue because we've never done it since World War II. It turns out that as a federal government, we're doing the same thing and we're getting the same results. And the challenge is we can't keep doing that. So how do you fix a problem like this that seems unsustainable when you can't get any more revenue? There are no areas that you really want to cut. Who wants to have less health care, less education? Who wants to not have a military? I mean, I was just thinking, imagine there's no military. Russia's sitting over there saying, you know, a long time ago we sold you Alaska. There's a title defect, and therefore we're gonna take it back. Well, with no military, what's to stop them? I mean, they wouldn't invade a sovereign country. Well, tell the folks in Ukraine that. So how do you fix this problem? It turns out that we are really good at spending money, but we're not very good at spending money. And what do I mean by that? We can spend the heck out of money, but we don't get good value for our money. Remember, the biggest component of spending is health care. We spend more money than any country on the face of the earth, more than anybody else. We're number one. But look at life expectancy. Japan spends a third of what we spend, and they live 8 years longer. The average, just the big country average, half of what we spend, and live 6 years longer. So we're spending too much and getting too little. And whenever we talk about healthcare, everybody says, well, how in the world can you fix healthcare? In preparation for this talk, I asked every healthcare professional I knew, I said, well, is the American healthcare system efficient and cost effective? And the ones that didn't laugh at me said, have you lost your mind? Got a number of examples. One was a doctor who works in a VA clinic. He said, we have to give eye drops, and when we do eye drops, we have to open a new vial of eye drops. That's great, I'm happy to hear it. You give the eye drops. If that's the eye drop the patient needs, we can't give it to the patient. We have to throw it away and prescribe. Well, I said, that's dumb. He said, that's only the least of the dumb things we do. I could go on forever. He didn't have time to go on forever. I asked a nurse, I said, is healthcare efficient and effective? I said, are you kidding? Have you lost your mind? We do a lot of things in healthcare that are inefficient. I'm involved with a clinic in the 9th Ward that deals with very poor people. We get paid as a clinic for doing procedures, but not for healthcare counseling, which is what most of the folks need. So you're really stressed. You get paid by Medicare, Medicaid for doing stuff, procedures, operations, prescribing, but not for the counseling on diabetes, not on the counseling on hypertension, not on the real counseling that would make a difference. So how do we fix this problem? One is we spend our money better. We tell our folks in Washington, say, look, you have to start with a clean slate. If we got our healthcare spending down to the average of the other developed countries, this deficit problem almost all goes away. Now, it's not just healthcare. There are other examples. If you talk to people that are involved with the government and say, well, how's the government doing in terms of efficiency? You're not going to be hearing, the government's great. They're super efficient. Man, I'm so happy I deal with them. It's like, when I have to call the government, it's like, that's the first thing on my day. I want to do that all the time because they're so helpful, so effective. So, education. We're not number one in education, but we're close. We're number 4. We spend a lot of money on education. And you would think this is a great thing. We should get great results because we're spending a lot of money, and therefore we're going to do very well compared to the rest of the world. The challenge is, if you talk to anybody who's involved in education, the kids are just not paying much attention. The COVID, pretending to learn, my goodness, anybody who did remote learning, I have friends that are teachers, they said, the students are literally making their weekend plans in front of me using the chat feature. It's like, and what do? They're not in the room. You can't discipline. There's nothing you can do about it. So we're spending an awful lot of money on education. And if you look at this chart, it's a little bit of a busy chart. We're average. We're down into the middle, and we've been sliding through the years. This is and it's a 2018, I know it's a dated chart, it's only updated every 5 years, but I talked to the people that produced it, they said, just be glad you don't have the updated chart. I said, why is that? He said, y'all are much worse. The COVID, we know, look, we have children, grandchildren. Which of you think that your children and grandchildren got a better education during COVID with remote learning? Apparently, we mismanaged this in the US, and we mismanaged it in Louisiana. It's unfortunate, it's a reality. So we're spending in the top 4. We were getting medium results. We are actually getting worse results. So the challenge in education is too much money going in and a bad result going out. And I know some of you are going to say this, and my wife and son were both teachers. I said, you're picking on the teachers. I am not picking on the teachers. The big growth in education was not in the classroom, it was in the administrative staff. Same thing on the college level. It wasn't at the professor level, it was the administrative staff. And I don't know any teacher that has ever said, I just wish, my fondest wish is that the Department of Education would increase the central office staff. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, our results would be great. That's where we're spending our money, and we're effectively wasting money, and we're achieving a poor result because we're spending too much and expecting too little. The challenge is, around the world, we're facing people that actually expect the children to learn. They don't allow cell phones in the classroom, they focus on education, and the results are starkly different. So for significantly less money, they're achieving a significantly better result. So our problem is we're spending money. We're really good at spending money. We're not good at getting value for money. So, should we be concerned? Absolutely. Is this solvable? It is solvable. We are in a political season right now. This is a time when candidates ask us to vote for them and they come up with their different ideas. Our obligation as voters is to demand actual accountability and say, we're spending enough money, but you're not giving us the results that we need. If you remember the slide early this morning about the development cost, 25% of the cost of a new house is excessive government regulation and additional land use restrictions. Wouldn't it be nice if houses were 25% cheaper? That'd be phenomenal. So what we need to do as citizens is tell our elected officials, tell anyone involved, that you're getting enough money. You cannot get more money. Remember that chart. The U.S. is not going to pay more than 20% to the government. So you're not going to get more money. This increased deficit is causing a problem for all of us in the real estate business because it has pushed real estate prices, real estate mortgage costs higher than they need to be. So the solution is not higher taxes because, once again, higher income tax rates don't result in greater collection. The solution is spending the money effectively and getting what we're actually paying for. So, serious problem. It's a problem that faces the entire United States, thank goodness, not just Louisiana, but it's an incredibly solvable problem. And going back to Apollo 13, it's one that can be solved because ultimately those guys focused and they landed the spacecraft. So what we need to do is tell our elected officials, folks, you actually have to stop saying, well, that's always the way it's been done. We can't change this because these are the rules. We can't do that because it's a historic. We can't do this because of the union. We have to insist, say, folks, we're on an unsustainable path. It is hurting the country, it's hurting our customers, it's hurting the real estate business, and ultimately it's going to really hurt America if we continue on this unsustainable path of growing deficits and growing interest rates. But just as Apollo 13, smart people working together land the spacecraft. And that's what we're going to do. You know, it was once well said that Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted all the other options. We're close to exhausting all the other options. But I'm concerned, but I'm confident we are going to land the spacecraft. So thank you so much for hanging in. All right, and on to the cocktail party.